I took a night security job at Red Pine Lodge in Vermont last November, and I'll never work alone again. The lodge had been closed since early October, sitting empty on the mountain waiting for snow season. My job was simple: walk the halls twice a night, check the doors, make sure pipes weren't freezing, and watch for It paid $15 an hour for an 8-hour shift, and I had the entire place to myself. Perfect for a broke college student. The first 2 nights were boring. I'd arrive at 10 p.m., unlock the main entrance with the master key they gave me, and do my rounds. The lodge was massive. 3 floors of guest rooms, a restaurant staff quarters, and a basement full of maintenance equipment. I'd walk through with my flashlight, check every door, then sit in the security office watching Netflix until my next round at 2 a.m. On the 3rd night, I found wet boot prints in the main hallway. They started at the locked front entrance and led straight down the corridor toward the staff door. I followed them with my flashlight. The prints were clear, like someone had just walked through snow, even though it hadn't snowed in 2 days and the entrance had been locked when I arrived. They stopped at a supply closet. I stood there staring at the door for a long moment before opening it. Inside was nothing but cleaning supplies and old mop buckets. No wet footprints inside the closet, no water on the floor. Just the prints in the hallway that led directly to that door and stopped. I told myself someone must have come in during the day, maybe maintenance. But when I checked the log, no one had been there since my shift the night before. The next night, the prints appeared again. This time, they started at a side exit near the restaurant and led upstairs to the 3rd floor. I followed them slowly, my heart pounding harder with each step. They went down the 3rd floor hallway and stopped at room 312. I used my master key and opened the door. The room was empty, freezing cold, and the window was locked from the inside. No boot prints on the carpet. Nothing. I started carrying a pocket knife after that, even though it probably wouldn't help if someone was actually in the building with me. On the 5th night, I heard the ski lifts running. It was 3:15 a.m., and I was doing my rounds on the 2nd floor when I heard the mechanical hum and the rhythmic clunking of chairs moving on the cable. I went to a window and looked out at the mountain. The lift was moving, chairs swinging slowly in the darkness, going up and coming back down, over and over. The power to the lifts had been shut off in October. I checked the breaker room in the basement. Everything was off. But when I went back upstairs and looked out the window, the lifts were still running. They stopped at 3:47 a.m. I wrote down the time. On my 6th night, I found the sauna room. I'd been avoiding the far corner of the basement because it creeped me out. Just old equipment and dark hallways. But that night, I decided to check every room thoroughly. Past the furnace, down a narrow corridor, I found a door I hadn't noticed before. It was unlocked. Inside was an old sauna that hadn't been used in years. Except someone had been using it recently. There was a sleeping bag spread out on the wooden bench, empty water bottles lined up against the wall, and a phone charger plugged into an outlet. A duffel bag sat in the corner. I backed out of the room slowly and quietly. My hands were shaking. Someone was living here. Someone had been here the entire time I'd been working. I went straight to the security office and locked the door. That's when I noticed something I should have seen earlier. The security monitors showed 12 different camera feeds from around the lodge, but one monitor showed the security office itself. The camera was pointed directly at the desk where I sat every night. I looked up at the corner of the room. There was no camera there. The feed was coming from somewhere else, recorded earlier maybe. Or I didn't want to think about it. I called my supervisor and told him I was leaving early, but I felt sick. He wasn't happy, but said fine. I grabbed my coat and walked quickly toward the main entrance. That's when I saw someone standing at the end of the hallway near the restaurant. A man in dark clothes, just standing there, watching me. I didn't wait to see what he'd do. I ran, I got in my car, and drove away. I called the police from the road and told them everything. They said they'd send someone to check it out. The next day, my supervisor called and said they'd found evidence someone had been staying in the basement, but whoever it was had left. They found the sleeping bag, the water bottles, everything I described. They also found something else, a notebook filled with my schedule, descriptions of my car, and notes about which nights I worked. I quit the next day. I don't care how much the job paid. The worst part, they offered the position to someone else, and that person took it. I hope they're more careful than I was. I moved into a studio apartment in downtown Portland 3 months ago, and I'm looking for a new place now. The apartment was perfect when I first saw it. Affordable, close to work, and it had a big window overlooking a courtyard shared by 4 buildings. My unit faced another building directly across, maybe 40 feet away. I work from home as a graphic designer, so I spent a lot of time at my desk by that window. About 2 weeks after moving in, I noticed the woman in the apartment across from mine. Her window lined up perfectly with mine, and I could see into her place pretty clearly. I didn't mean to watch her or anything creepy like that, but when you're staring at a computer screen all day, your eyes wander. I noticed we had the same schedule. She'd wake up around 7 and when I'd She'd make coffee when I made coffee. She'd sit at her desk around the same time I sat at mine. At first, I thought it was funny. Just a coincidence that we both worked from home and had similar routines. Then it got weirder. I'd stand up to stretch, and within seconds, she'd stand up and stretch. I'd walk to the kitchen. She'd walk to her kitchen. I'd do jumping jacks during a break, and she'd start doing jumping jacks. My roommate from college, Tyler, came to visit one weekend. I told him about it, and he laughed. He said she was probably just messing with me, that she'd noticed me watching and decided to have some fun. To prove his point, I stood at the window and waved dramatically. She waved back at the exact same moment. Same motion, same duration. Tyler stopped laughing. He walked up to the window and looked across at her apartment. His face went pale. He asked me how long this had been happening. I told him about 2 weeks. He turned to me and said the apartment across the way had been empty since last year. He knew because his friend had lived in this building before me and mentioned that unit never got rented out. It had some kind of mold problem. I looked back at the window. The woman was still there, sitting at her desk, typing. I could see her clearly. Tyler insisted he was looking at a dark, empty window. We stood there together, both looking at the same window, seeing completely different things. He left pretty quickly after that. I tried to ignore it, but it became impossible. Over the next week, I started noticing her apartment looked identical to mine. Same furniture layout, same posters on the wall, same lamp on the desk. Everything was a mirror image of my place. I hadn't rearranged anything. She had, or it had, or whatever was happening, had changed to match me perfectly. I stopped looking out the window. I kept the blinds closed during the day, which made working miserable because the apartment got dark and depressing. But each night I'd sometimes peek through a crack in the blinds. She was always there, sitting in the dark, facing my window. Last Tuesday, I came home from getting groceries and forgot to close the blinds. I was putting food away when I glanced at the window. She was standing at her window holding up a piece of paper. I froze. Written on the paper in large black letters was my full name and the address of the house I grew up in, the one I lived in until I was 12 before my parents moved. There's no way anyone could know that address unless they'd really dug into my past. I looked away for just a second to grab my phone, and when I looked back, she was gone. The apartment across the way was completely dark. I stared at it for a full minute. Then I heard my apartment door rattle. I spun around. The deadbolt was unlocked, and the door was slightly open. I always lock it. Always. I ran over and slammed it shut, locked both locks, and shoved a chair under the handle. I called the building manager the next day and asked about the unit across from mine. He confirmed it had been vacant for 14 months due to structural issues. No one had accessed it in that time. I'm moving out at the end of the month. I don't care about losing my deposit. I carpooled with a coworker for 3 weeks, and now I take a different route to work every single day. My commute from San Jose to San Francisco was killing me, both in gas money and sanity. 90 minutes each way, sometimes 2 hours if traffic was bad. When a guy from my office named Dave mentioned he lived near me and suggested carpooling, I jumped hatchet. We'd split gas costs, get to use the carpool lane, and cut the commute down to an hour. It seemed perfect. Dave was quiet, but nice enough. mid-30s, worked in a different department than me, always on time. We'd meet at a park and drive lot off the highway at 6 a.m., and I'd drive us both into the city. He'd chip in for gas every week without me even asking. The first week went great. The second week, I started noticing small things. Dave never looked at his phone during the drive. Not once. Everyone checks their phone, right? Even just to glance at messages or change music. He'd just sit there staring out the window, or straight ahead. When I asked him about it, he said he'd like to disconnect during commutes. Fair enough, I guess. He also never told me exactly where he lived. When I'd offer to drop him closer to his place, he'd always insist on getting out at the same Chevron station near his neighborhood. He'd say it was easier and he didn't want to make me go out of my way. After 2 weeks, I realized I had no idea where this guy actually lived. One morning, I arrived at our meeting spot 15 minutes early because I couldn't sleep. Dave was already there, standing next to the curb, wearing the same clothes he'd worn the day before. The exact same flannel shirt and jeans. I pulled up and asked if he'd been waiting long. He said no, that he'd just gotten there. But I'd seen him standing there as I turned into the parking lot. He'd been there a while. That weekend, I didn't think much about it. But on Monday, something happened that I can't explain. I decided to take a different route home that day, just to avoid some construction. I was on Highway 280 instead of our usual 101. Traffic was stop and go, and I was zoned out listening to a podcast when I glanced at the car next to me. Dave was in the passenger seat of a silver Honda, staring directly at me. Not glancing, staring. The woman driving didn't seem to notice me, but Dave's eyes were locked on mine. I felt my stomach drop. I swerved into the next lane and sped up, cutting off another car. I drove erratically for the next 10 minutes, taking random exits and turns until I was sure I'd lost him. I didn't offer to carpool the next day. I texted Dave that morning, saying I had to run errands after work and couldn't give him a ride. He responded immediately, "No problem. See you on the road." That message made my skin crawl. I took a completely different route that day, leaving an hour earlier than usual. I didn't see him. For the next week, I varied my route and schedule. Different highways, different times, even worked from home twice. I didn't see Dave once during the commute, and I started to relax. Maybe it had been a coincidence. Maybe he really did carpool with other people. Last Friday, I got home after dark. I parked in my driveway and grabbed my work bag from the passenger seat. That's when I saw it. A yellow Post-it note stuck to my windshield wiper. I got out and pulled it off. Written in neat handwriting, it said, "See you Monday. You're my favorite part of the commute." I reported it to HR, but they said without proof of harassment or threats, there wasn't much they could do. Dave still works there. I see him sometimes in the building, and he always smiles and waves like nothing happened. I don't wave back. I bought a dash cam, and I never drive the same route twice in a row. I check my rearview mirror constantly. Last week, I swear, I saw that silver Honda 3 cars behind me on my way home. I couldn't see who was in the passenger seat. If these stories messed with your head even a little bit, hit that subscribe button and drop a like. Trust me, you'll want to hear what happens next time someone ignores the warning signs. Stay safe out there.